You get a chance to take care of people. You transform people. The profession over the years has gone from being a needs-based profession to being a want-based profession. Everyone now does cosmetic. If you have the ability to really create a smile, you can change someone's life.
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Today, we are excited to welcome Craig Abramowitz, a trailblazer in the dental service organization sector with over 2 decades of experience transforming the business of dentistry. Craig is widely recognized for his entrepreneurial ventures and leadership in the DSO space, including founding Northeast Dental Management, which grew to become one of the largest DSOs in the Northeast under his guidance. In addition to his success with Northeast Dental, Craig is on the boards of several prominent organizations, including Dental Care Alliance and Smile Brands. His extensive expertise in practice management, scaling operations, and fostering strategic partnerships has set the standard for growth and innovation in the dental industry. Craig, super excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm great. Going to have a bunch of private equity guys puking right about now, but just for a little correction, I'm off the board of Dental Care Alliance. I now advise the board, but I joined a couple of more boards, so lots of board work sitting in the DSO space, and it is 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears.
Absolutely. Look, I think trailblazer is very fitting. I mean, you founded Northeast Dental early 2000s. Is that right?
Founded it in 2003, did grow it into the largest DSO that was really centered in the Northeast solely. And then in 2016, after a couple of recaps, merged it with Dental Care Alliance, and that created the 4th largest DSO in the country.
Awesome. Well, hey, before we kind of get completely into it, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, we're recording this just a few days before. It'll probably air a few weeks after. But anything you are particularly thankful for this year, either personally, professionally, or otherwise?
Always being thankful of family and friends. Mike, as you know, that's what it's all about. If that's not there, everything else is just has no meaning.
That is the truth. Well, let me ask you this then, and kind of along those lines. When you build such a successful career for yourself, and you build these large organizations, you're responsible for the success of a lot of people that work within your organizations. How did you balance kind of work life and family and friends? I know it's a challenge for a lot of really high achievers.
My usual self-deprecating speech would be I'm a dentist, not a particular good one, and I had to get into managing offices to put food on the table. That's partly true. The closer reality is trying to find a work-life balance. Seeing patients, growing the business, and trying to come home and be dad. There's only 24 hours in the day. Something had to give. I love the dad part. My partners at the time hated the business end of it. And I hung up the drill, patient supported, and just went into pure just buying, managing, running them. And it's what I had the affinity to. It's what I got fulfillment out of. I still enjoy it to this day. Now, at least I don't have the day-to-day responsibility. I get to give a lot of advice. And sometimes they take the advice, and sometimes they tell me what to do with the advice, and all good.
So when you first started Northeast, DSOs were kind of at their infancy, right? Like, what allowed you to even understand or believe that building something like you built was going to work?
I wasn't sure it was going to work, but I knew if I surrounded myself with good people, typically that's usually a recipe of success. And I had to learn the difference between being an owner and being the boss. I was the owner, but I was not the boss. I brought on a couple of bosses who, the really good ones, would tell me what to do, where I had to be, and took it from there. And I just all about the people you surrounded yourself with. There was no thought about building into a DSO. We were just going to go a practice at a time. And each time we did an affiliation, we learned something different that we didn't know before. So what ended up happening is the whole became greater than the sum of the parts.
Now, at any given point, as you were building Northeast, did there become a vision of here's a goal for us. We want to have this many affiliated practices. We want to become this large. Was it always kind of a view of as long as we're delivering great patient care, the rest will take care of itself? How did you think about things like that?
If it's going to be successful, it's all about taking care of the patients. As long as you're taking care of the patients, building relationships, it all will grow from there. We never set out to be the biggest. Obviously, always wanted to be the best at what we do. And just had some great partners, both on the clinical end and the non-clinical end, that we all came together. Some of the people I work with have been there for over 30 years, and we're still tight to this day.
So in the Planet DDS world, you're a bit of a legend. Northeast is a bit of a legend. And when Eric acquired the company, I know that you were one of the first people that he wanted to have a conversation with, which was like, hey, why the heck did you buy this software? I want to make sure that I'm acquiring a good business with a good product. I don't typically talk too much about the software side on the podcast or what we do, but because you were such an early adopter of a cloud product, particularly ours, I'm just curious if you could maybe share a story or two about how that came to be. Nobody thought cloud was even viable for dental at that. I mean, heck, 5 years ago when I first joined, I sat at an ADSO conference and I heard speakers from the front of the room saying, cloud is not ready for dental. You cannot use cloud software. And you were in it years before. So I'm just curious, like, how did that all come about?
I guess adversity leads to ingenuity. Typically, we're always slaves to the servers, always had the mirror drives and all the backups in the world. And every time I had an issue and I tried to restore the backup, there was a glitch. Something, for one reason, there was something, and I forget the message that used to come up, but essentially, file is corrupted seemed to be like the big one. And I was just like, okay, unless I'm going to keep a full-time IT department running around trying to restore and checking backups, there has to be something better. One of the early partners that I had, if she's listening, would be a woman named Christina Hong. And she goes, you need to get into the cloud. There were two different options back then. I'll leave out the name of the first company who wanted us to switch the way we do things to fit the software, and then sit down with Denticon. And it was like, no, we can tweak the software to really support you in the way you run your thing. One of the companies that was doing a beta test, and conversely, I now sit on that board, was Smile Brands. Spoke to the CEO, Steve Bilth, and the CFO, Brad Schmidt, who said, we tried it, I think in the Arizona market, it really worked well. We're a little concerned about switching the entire company onto it. But between that recommendation, speaking to Richard Lee, who was the founder, and the people on my team, we said, let's go for it. If I was wrong, I would have been shook hand, because I would have tanked the company for a bunch of software that didn't work. But I was able to get a little bit ahead of the curve. It's worked out great. The only time we ever hear anything is when it's down about 3 minutes in the course of the year and all the phones light up. But apart from that, it was probably the single best non-clinical decision that I made with the business.
Yeah. And after the DCA acquisition, that was kind of a force multiplier for the organization, having DCA adopt the software as well. I think it was maybe a moment of not panic, but at least concern to Eric and the team when that occurred, because there was always the risk that one of the largest customers at that time would be converted off, and it ended up working out in the opposite way and being a big benefit. And I think that the partnership between the companies and the organization is something that has really allowed us to gain an understanding of how to create a product that allows for that flexibility that you mentioned, where we can kind of offer the ability to choose your own adventure versus having to kind of bolt on to joining ours and whatever we're planning on doing within the product.
Early on, and I remember those calls, I think it was 2 calls I had with Eric. I had to tell him, listen, we're good. One of the requirements from my end is we agreed to shut down our office in Paramus, New Jersey, but there was no way I was doing a software conversion again. I already knew I had the best software out there. And if my counterpart wanted to stick to his software, he could have, but I wasn't going to switch Northeast Dental. And, after sitting down with Mitch, we both agreed it made the most sense in the world to get DCA off QSI, which what it was at the time, and flip it all over to Denticon. And it's been a great decision.
Yeah, you mentioned that, look, you brought in a lot of great people when you were first starting Northeast, and that now you give a lot of advice. What would be the piece of advice that you would give to somebody founding a DSO, maybe from scratch or just a plan? Maybe they have investment. They're going to go out and they're going to look to acquire, say, 10 practices. What would be the three things you would advise them to focus on to give them the best opportunity to succeed?
You must have partners in the business. I am a fan of partners. When I started Northeast Dental, one of the first things was, that I told the private equity firm is we're going to partner with practices. So even though someone took the phrase, and I won't say who, dental partnership organization, they are by far not the first, second, or third. And it was, I don't even know if I was the first, but it was, we were always going to partner with the practices in the field. So you have to have great partners in the field. If you don't have that, you're just going to spin your wheels and the turnover is going to kill you. Second thing is you need great people. You have to know what your core competencies are and you have to be intellectually honest with yourself. What am I really good at and what do I need to support the people in the field? If you're not doing a dentistry, you're supporting someone who is. If you're not doing one of the above, you should be unemployed. And then the third thing is just put the proper tech stack together to support the business. Do it right the first time. Build a proper foundation. Because if you start trying to cut corners, and you're doing it the wrong way, it might work when you have 5, 6, 7, 8 practices, but eventually it's going to crash.
Now, you make the self-deprecating joke about maybe not being the world's best dentist, but what brought you into dentistry at the outset?
You haven't heard this story. My college application when I was a senior in high school in New York University had 2 boxes to check on the application. One said AB MBA and one said AB DDS. AB MBA was 5 years, AB DDS was 7 years, and I just went essentially eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I was going to pick one of them. And I checked this, Mo came up on the 7-year box. I checked the box, and a month later, I got a phone call from NYU saying, you want to be a dentist? And I found out I've had the best grades in calculus, but I could interview. And it was like, Mike, yes, I do. I've always wanted to be a dentist. And the rest is history. 7 years later, I was a dentist. That is the only reason. Before that, I really wanted to be a vet, to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay. So there wasn't like a huge amount of like passion. You didn't have a father or family members that were dentists. It was a twist of fate, if you will.
It was a twist of fate. No family members were dentists to the point where I guess I had some art project when I was in high school with clay. And when I told my mother I'm going to go to dental school, she goes, really? She goes, had they seen any of your work with your hands? And I was just like, no, I kept it out of the interview process, Mom, but thank you.
a ringing endorsement there. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Mom. It's funny you mentioned the calculus. So when I went to school initially, I went as a computer science major, and that was at UCSB. And I loved the computer science piece, and I was great with all the physics. And then I hit calculus, and I got a D, and I was like, ooh, this is not good. So I took it again, and I got a D plus. And I go, well, this is no better. And so I switched to political science because in the same way that you can interview well, if you can write well, and if you can articulate your viewpoints, you can go a long way with political science without having to take calculus. So I can completely empathize with that approach.
With all due respect to Steve Thorne, who I know was a computer science major, you have way too much personality to be a computer science major.
And look, it was in the late 90s. It felt like the right thing. And who knows, could have been like the next Mark Zuckerberg or something. So,
and Mike, you don't need calculus anyway for anything, with all due respect.
That is starting to become very apparent because I haven't thought about it a drop for the past maybe 30 years until we've had this conversation. It's like cursive right now too, for my children. It's like we took years of learning how to like write in cursive, and now it's something that they just don't even. I don't even know that they know how to do their own signature.
No, actually, the question is what's cursive?
That's right. I guess the purpose is that you can sign something, which I guess could also come in handy.
That is the only purpose, providing we're still signing checks, which I don't even think we sign checks anymore.
It's true. But I think the only time that people are actually validating signatures is supposed to be during elections when you're sending in your mail-in ballots and they check it against your license. But other than that, I don't think a whole lot of people put a whole lot of thought into what they're signing anymore these days.
And depending upon which political party, some people think the elections are being gamed and some don't. And, I guess we'll save that for other time.
Yeah, we should definitely save that one for another time. how do you enjoy the work on being on boards and, the transition from being kind of an operator and a builder? And I shouldn't say that you're not a builder now, but it is definitely kind of a different motion. And what type of fulfillment do you find in that compared to when you were, building your organization?
Building the organization, being a CEO, it's a labor of love. And you have to have a fire in the belly. And at some point in time, to me, that fire started to diminish. It never fully gone out. I still try to figure out what I want to do when I grow up one day, providing I grow up one day. But in the interim, love the board work. If you can find good teams to work with, and I've been blessed with that, it is great. You're able to really share everything you've done wrong. By the way, just as a step back a little bit, the really, really smart guys learn from doing things right. Has never been me. I actually learn really great lessons when I screw something up and it costs myself money, but it is really embedded. And over 20 something years, I screwed everything up at one time or another, except for my softwares. I know this is sponsored by Planet DDS over there. Otherwise, I screwed everything else up.
I would imagine you have some stories about the software and letting you down at some point too over the amount of time that you were using it. So nobody's perfect.
It's not perfect, but it really hasn't. It's done exactly what it's supposed to do. And I'm saying I did it to anyone.
Do you have any particular stories that you can think of that were particularly painful learnings for you of a failure or something that happened that was a mistake that cost you money that ultimately in the long run turned out to be a blessing?
Lots of things have cost me money over the years, but a lot of it centers around acquisitions. There's really two different types of DSOs. Those that are affiliation acquisition based, those that are de novo based, and you can have the combination of the two. So the screw up that I've made in the acquisitions, buying the wrong practice, falling for not trusting my instincts. Typically, first rule of acquisitions are no assholes allowed. No exception. Doesn't make a difference what the price is. If you don't like them and you just don't feel right and you want to wash your hands after you shake their hands, just turn around and just walk away. And in the past, when I've broken that rule, it has always come back to bite me in the ass.
What would cause you to break it? Is it just the economics look so good?
The economics look so good that I just said, wow, I'm buying this for such a great price. And he's such a turd. Let's go for it. And a turd is a turd.
I love the parallels to different industries and spaces. So we have what we call revenue team principles at Planet DDS. And the sixth revenue team principle is negative and toxic behavior and never worth the revenue that it generates. And we basically call that the no asshole rule. The same sort of thing. It's like you can find really talented individuals that can drive results, but the actual cost of those results becomes so great in the detriment that it can cause to the culture of the organization or the team around them, or whether or not it's even like long-term viable to maintain them over time, that it is absolutely not worth putting up with that. But it is a lesson that is hard learned, I think, because when you do see the revenue or the economics or whatever, to turn that down is tough.
Are both time sucks and culture sucks. The best organizations have a culture to them. And you bring in someone, they just suck the energy out of you. Like you look at your phone, the phone rings, and you just dread having to answer the phone because it's always going to be someone's doing something wrong that's affecting them and they're perfect. And, if someone's being an ass during the due diligence process before they take your money, you know exactly what you're going to have after the check clears, which is going to be a real, twice the ass they were before. And just walk away. Just nod the knee, really sorry. And you just feel so much better afterwards.
I heard a great term for those individuals whose phone call you don't want to answer because if you answer, by the time you get off the call, you need to take a nap, you're going to be completely drained, is energy vampire. And I really feel like that's a real thing. There are those individuals that seem to be able to suck the energy right out of you and just they feed off of it.
Oh, listen, in the years when I was a practicing dentist, coming home with the saliva stains on my shirts way back then, you had those patients as well. It was the same thing. They were patients you just had to fire from the office. But it just wasn't worth it. Just giving them money back, wish them well, and refer them to one of your competitors.
Yeah. When you talk about culture, what did culture mean to you? And how would you define a good culture within an organization?
Care about the patients, care about the offices and the doctors. caring about each other, but it's just, 1+1 having to equal 3. And that's not done with math, that is done with culture. And the more good people, take any organization in dental, outside of dental, the more good people you surround yourself with, you will get the result that you need, whatever it's going to be. I've discussed this with many of my peers in the industry. As far as the first three rules of real estate is location, location, location. And I agree with that. But you give me a good doctor and a good manager, and I can make any location work. It doesn't make a difference. I don't care what the competition is. Don't put me in the middle of the Mojave Desert, but great people, just F the key. I can run all my analytics, all my business intelligence, great doctor and a great manager, and it just works.
So you've seen a lot of change in this industry over, let's just call it the last 20 years. And as you're kind of maybe pulling your crystal ball out and looking at the future, I know you have a lot of conversations with people all the time. You hear about challenges, you hear about trends, you kind of get a real understanding of what the market looks like today. What are some of the things that make you excited about the space where you're still like, this is a great industry to be in?
And it is a great industry. My youngest is a senior in college right now. He's going pre-dental. And if I didn't think it was a great industry, I would have said, go into software engineering. If you don't like that, go into poli-sci.
That's right.
Listen, you get a chance to take care of people. You transform people. The profession over the years has gone from being a needs-based profession to being a want-based profession. Everyone now does cosmetic. If you have the ability to really create a smile, you can change someone's life. And the relationship that you build over the years, it is a great profession. As far as what's going on in the dental field right now, it's changing. When many of us first started at this, the comment of the DSO, and before DSOs, we were called dental practice manager companies. It was an ugly word. Organized dentistry pushed really, really hard against us. And the talent back then used to be in business development. There were no brokers, running around calling every single practice in the country to get them to sign up so they can turn around and try to flip it to you. Talent was all getting people to say, hey, listen, join the organization. We're better together than we are apart. Now it's changed. The talent really is, it goes from the business development part, which is not difficult anymore because there's 10 brokers trying to push every practice on you. The talent now is the integration of those practices into operations. If you can do that well, that's where the talent lies. Once a month, I'll get a phone call from a private equity firm saying, hey, would you take a look at this for us? These individuals are amazing. They put together $20 million of EBITDA in 15 months. And you take a look and they have zero turnover. So the first thing is, okay, there's no talent to putting together $20 million of EBITDA. All I have to do is pay an extra quarter turn or a half turn and give the broker a little extra commission. And they will steer everything my way. I now will have $20 million of EBITDA. The only problem is, and I have them locked into contracts, so they're not going to leave. But as soon as those contracts are up, what do I have? Did I build a company or did I just try to do alchemy? Which to me is, if you've heard the phrase from the old fantasy books, is really lead into gold. But in this situation, what happens too many times with some of the more recent vintage DSOs is, if I buy 5 pieces of when it's all said and done, I don't have gold. All I have is a big pile of And, there are 2 different types of DSOs. There are pretenders and there are contenders. The contenders know how to add value to their practices. The pretenders is just about an arbitrage play. I'm going to buy for X and I'm going to try to recapitalize at 2X. And that's all it is in my work if the market's going great. But as soon as the market corrects itself, they're in trouble. And you have a lot of that right now.
Yeah, so it's interesting, kind of the dichotomy here, because so I joined Planet DS a little over 5 years ago, and I was doing my research and reading all the articles and going to all the different message boards. And you could still see a lot of the anti-corporate dentistry kind of narrative that was out there, and in particular with some of the smaller kind of independent-minded message boards where you would see a lot of comments about like their experience at DSOs. Over the past 5 years, I really do think, and I know that this has been a long time coming and started probably 20 years ago, that there is generally a more positive view of DSOs, that there are a lot of DSOs doing a lot of really good things and supporting their practices and supporting their clinicians, providing great patient outcomes and remaking smiles, all of that. But on the other hand, you still do have, and maybe as a result of such an influx of private equity money with some investment groups that may not have that operating partner to build something and add the value, but see the arbitrage opportunity where there is kind of this blend. Would you say that overall, if the direction that the market could take would be predominantly those contenders, not the pretenders, and if that was more of the notion of how you should form and create a group, that would be better for dentistry? Or do the pretenders actually create opportunities for the contenders to strengthen their business over time?
It might be both, Mike. At the end, if you're only looking to do an arbitrage play and you're not looking to add value, you shouldn't be in the business, period. It gives many of us a bad name. We're only as good as the company we keep. And, when people ask us, who are your competitors? I don't really have competitors per se. Everyone in the DSO space, I benefit when everyone does well, because the more money they're able to return to the doctors and the shareholders of the company, the more interest comes into the business and it gives better valuation for everyone. So I don't want to see anyone fail. I was at speaking at a dental, one of the panels some years back with someone, and they were taking a harsh view of what they call DSO/corporate back dentistry and how he would never consider selling. And I had the opportunity, and my comment was, you're completely full of shit. You will take the first check that comes your way. If that amount happens to be a little bit higher than someone else, you're going to take that check and you're going to run. That's exactly what he did.
It's a little bit of virtue signaling.
I haven't seen anyone push a 7-figure check across the table and say, no, I don't want to take it. It's corporate dentistry. And if anyone else has, please send me a note, because I have not seen that done yet.
That's right. So when you think of the big four, we, of course, have Heartland, you've got Aspen, Pacific Dental Services, Smile Brands, all with really fantastic leadership. I was hearing Steve Built on panel, I think it might have been at the ADSO show that was back in July, and sharing some of the stories about kind of all these publicly traded dental companies that were in existence at one point. And it is definitely more of a private equity backed world that we live in today. But do you foresee, with the continued growth of DSOs, that there will have to be a play for more companies to go public?
So I left the early part of my history out. So for a period of time, I was public. I was with a company called Monarch Dental.
Was that Jack Castle?
No.
Okay.
Monarch Dental was out of Dallas. Jack was out of Houston, typically.
Okay, yes.
I mean, candidly, probably two guys never should have gone public, and it didn't work. It was one of the mistakes that I learned from, and costing myself a fair amount of money in the process, was if you take a dentist who's doing quite well in the practice, and all of a sudden you decide you give him $1 million check, don't be surprised if he doesn't want to work 60 hours a week anymore as an employee of yours. And all the pro formas that they did years ago kind of blew up because you took the dentist who was an owner and you gave him an employee mindset. And that was really the rationale before. If I'm going to do this again, I'm going to do partners or I'm not going to do it at all. And if you look at the most successful, the big three, which is going to be Rick and Pat at Heartland, Steve Thorne at Pacific, Bob at Aspen Dental, it's always some form of partnership with the field. It might be in compensation, but they lock the good people up. And I think that's been, I think they would agree that's been one of the keys to their success, is they don't treat the doctors as if they were employees. They treat them as partners. At some point in time, I would expect to see one of the three hit the IPO market. They're getting to the size where there's going to be fewer and fewer private buyers that they look to recapitalize. Or Steve Thorne's situation would be the first capitalization, because he's not private equity backed, as you know. But at some point in time, we're going to see it. And then listen, speaking on behalf of the whole industry, I hope they kill it and do amazingly well. This it'll benefit everyone.
Do you think there's a unlock or a key to going through and becoming public and retaining that sense of ownership that you get with your partner dentists in the organization, where they do not believe or feel like they are an employee? Is there a solution for that?
There has to be. It's going to be some form of restricted stock, some form of options or profit. It won't be profits interest at that time. Some form of options, restricted stock. But that was the lesson I learned, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one who learned that lesson. So there's going to be a way so people continue to grow, continue to see appreciation. And if it's done well, Now you'll have an open market. When you restrict the stock or loses its restriction, you're going to be able to sell it and be able to track its value on a day in, day out basis. It's going to be fully transparent when it's in the public markets.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch. I'd be curious as to your perspective as well about kind of the M&A market right now. And in the short time that I've been in dental, I witnessed, Smile Brands acquire Midwest. I watched Aspen acquire Clear Choice. I watched Heartland acquire American Dental Partners. I watched Mid-Atlantic and Western Dental become one organization. So there were some of these kind of larger transactions that took place, not just we're acquiring one practice at a time or 5 or 10, or just pursuing a de novo approach that accelerated the growth of some of these organizations. And now we see, I think, many more organizations, over 100 locations, many more platforms than there had been, a decade ago for sure. Would you anticipate, with the whole knowledge of arbitrage and EBITDA and how that adds together and where you get the value or don't get the value, and then also the challenge of integrating large organizations like that together, do you foresee there being more of that? Or do you think that it's going to be more of a play where you make smaller acquisitions over time?
If I'll take out that crystal ball again, we spoke about earlier, but I think in the next 5 years, Mike, you're going to see a further consolidation of the consolidators.
Okay.
And I think, obviously, the market's been a little challenged for the recaps in the healthcare services as well as the DSO space right now. So I expect to see some of these DSOs coming together and taking out synergies and recapitalizing the company. That'll be the next wave.
Yep. And do you foresee that we'll stick with your crystal ball for a second? On the emerging groups, we talked about hey, if you just buy 5 pieces of you're just going to end up with a big pile of So we were talking about some of the larger consolidators acquiring each other, but we also have seen over the past decade a huge amount of smaller groups, 3, 5, 10 practices start to get private equity funding and grow. Do you anticipate that will still be a driving force of consolidation, or will we see more consolidation on the high end of the market?
I think both. As long as private equity is able to get the returns they need by investing in the DSO space, they will continue. They're going further and further astray from the size they typically need to try to find something to invest in. But as long as they're getting the return, they're in, and typically your private equity, they look to triple their money every 5 years. That's the private equity mantra. The question is, some of these small groups, they're not even really a DSO, it's just a couple of practices that come together. And, I've seen some. It's not even a couple of practices that have come together. It's a couple of practices that will come together if they can get the private equity funded. So now you have some integration risk going on there. But private equity has been great to the DSO space. One of the things, I've been blessed with having some great private equity partners over the years. While I have certainly banged heads with all of them at one time or another, they all have made me better, have taught me a lot about what it takes to really run and build that business. So dentistry has been great for private equity, and private equity has been great for dentistry, I hope. I expect that marriage to continue. I think this is a speed bump. The cost of capital will come down at some point, and the market will be re-energized.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier about kind of these large premier organizations, your Heartland, your Pacific Dental Service, your Smile Brands. All of them have very prominent executive leadership. You have relationships with Bob Fontana and Steve Thorne and Steve Bilt, Pat Bauer, all of the leadership of these large organizations that are really kind of looked at as examples of how to run a dental service organization. What is it that all of these individuals have in common that creates the success that they've achieved?
They're probably all maniacal, sleep about 2 hours a night, work 22 hours a day. I have the opportunity to work close, being on Steve Bilt's board right now. I mean, I don't know if Steve sleeps. And I've known Bob Fontana for years, and Steve and Pat and Rick. They're all extremely passionate about what they do. They believe deeply, and they work 25 hours a day in a 24-hour day. One of the things I don't miss from being my CEO days is getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning 3 times a week, trying to remember what I was supposed to do the day before, which happened on a regular basis. But if there's one word, Mike, it's passion. They all have passion.
When you think of those 4, and I see them on panels and all these conversations all the time. They're very prevalent in the industry. One of the things that I think has been a takeaway for me with dental is that there's been this openness, even amongst maybe perceived competitors, to share and discuss about their experience, best practices, learnings, takeaways. Is that a unique thing to dental? And do you think it's going to go away as the industry becomes more consolidated?
When the aforementioned and some others set up the ADSO, and I guess I got invited in the second wave, but that time you had to have $30 million of revenue to be invited into the club. And I was always sitting there in mid-20s until I finally crossed the threshold. And all of a sudden, I had a seat at the table with the guys. And, as you just said, they couldn't have been more open. And any questions I asked was, hey, listen, this is what we saw. I remember driving to East Syracuse, New York to visit Aspen Dental, and Bob showing me his dashboards and how we put them together and how they drill down. And we're out at Steve Thorne's place, and Steve is this, here's a book we use on all our business development. We really give him a bound book as opposed to a couple little pages. And, I called Pat in the past getting advice about different softwares. And they've always been extremely accommodating. That's who they are. And that's not just me. I know they've helped a whole slew of others, and they realize as the space does better, it's better for everyone involved.
It's kind of the rising tide lifts all boats. I'm probably going to butcher that expression, but it's something along those lines.
No, I think you're pretty close. And I think the opposite is when the tide goes out, you find out who's wearing their shorts or not.
That's right. Who's swimming naked out there?
Who's swimming naked? So the whole ADSO was really set up. One of the reasons was to really share best practices. And, early on when I was involved with ADSO, that is exactly what happened.
All right. Well, I want to be conscious of your time, so we'll wrap up here in just a second. One last question for you. What are you kind of most excited about going into 2025?
I haven't even thought that far in advance, but I guess being that Thanksgiving's right around the corner, it's just continuing to do what I do, working with the different boards that I'm on. I also have a couple of practices, 5 practices in upstate New York that I'm a partner in. And I love the conversations. I love being in the board meetings. I like going to whether it's the ADSO meeting or Brian Caleo's DICOMA meeting, and really just seeing everyone again. You and I just spent 3 weeks ago, we were in Austin, Texas with a couple of the guys, watching F1, watching a bunch of cars speed around the racetracks, and excited to continue the relationships that have been built and looking forward to making new ones.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you very much for being willing to join. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point. And thank you so much, Craig. It was a real pleasure.
Well, listen, thank you, Mike, for having me on. They're my best to the team.
I will. Thank you. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.